In the heart of a small town in the United States, the City Diner was a refuge for residents looking for a cozy place to enjoy a home-cooked meal. The walls were adorned with old photos and memorabilia from local history, while the aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air. Sarah, a 28-year-old waitress, moved between the tables with a welcoming smile, serving the regulars and making small talk about their daily lives. With light brown hair tied into a messy bun and a simple uniform that featured her name embroidered on it, Sarah dreamed of one day opening her own cafe. It was a vision that had accompanied her since her adolescence, when she spent hours reading about coffee in magazines and planning every detail. A space where people can feel at home, she often told herself. But for now, reality kept her attentive at the tables, exchanging orders and smiles. On a typical afternoon, the restaurant was busy. The lively conversations of customers mingled with the clinking of cutlery and the noise of the coffee machine. Sarah headed to a table in the corner, where a group of friends were laughing and sharing stories. "Hey guys, what can I bring you today?" she asked, leaning down slightly to take the menu they held. "Hi Sarah, we'll have a burger and fries. And don't forget the milkshake," replied one of the girls, winking at her. "Of course, a very creamy milkshake coming." Sarah smiled and walked away to take the order. As he wrote, he noticed a sad-eyed young woman sitting at a nearby table, accompanied by an intimidating older man. The man, with a rigid posture and a sharp gaze, seemed to be controlling the situation in an oppressive manner. Sarah frowned, feeling a surge of worry. The young woman, who appeared to be around 19 years old, was looking down, almost as if trying to hide. The waitress couldn't take her eyes off that scene. Something was wrong. The man spoke with an authoritarian tone, gesturing exaggeratedly while the young woman just shook her head, as if she was agreeing with something she didn't want. Why doesn't she just get up and leave? Sarah thought, a knot forming in her stomach. She decided that as soon as she had a free moment, she would go to the young woman's table. After delivering the order to the table of the girl she had served earlier, Sarah observed the interaction more closely. The man, who she now identified as Tom, seemed increasingly impatient, looking at his watch and then at the young woman, as if he was waiting for something. It was then that, as Sarah was preparing to take another order, she saw the young woman discreetly raise her hand, making a gesture that looked like a distress signal. Sarah's heart quickened. The young girl was actually asking for help. It was a clear sign, and although the waitress was just a few steps away, the emotional distance seemed insurmountable. "What do I do?" she asked herself, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Looking at Tom, who now seemed more agitated, Sarah knew she couldn't ignore what was happening. She needs help, he thought. A chill ran down his spine. Sarah took a deep breath and decided she needed to act. But how? The restaurant was busy, and at every moment Tom could tell something was wrong. Sarah looked around, trying to find a way to approach the young woman without arousing suspicion. She remembered her emergency training, but adrenaline now dominated her thoughts. Serving a nearby table, Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the young woman. "Come on, I need to do something," she muttered to herself as she placed the plates on the table. The conversation of the surrounding customers seemed distant, as if everything was happening in slow motion. The young woman, Emily, looked around, her gaze pleading for help, and Sarah felt a surge of empathy. Finally, after the movement slowed down a bit, Sarah decided it was time to act. With a forced smile, she approached Emily and Tom's table. "Hi, how are you here? Can I get you anything else?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. Tom stared at her, his expression critical. "We are fine. We just need more water," he replied with a harsh tone, clearly irritated by the interruption. Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she wasn't going to give up. "Of course. 1 second, please," she said as she walked away. At that moment, she looked directly at Emily and, in a discreet gesture, raised an eyebrow, trying to convey the message that she was there to help. Emily, sensing the opportunity, responded with a slight nod of her head, almost imperceptible, but Sarah understood. The protective impulse was growing within her. The waitress headed to the water fountain and, as she filled a glass, quickly thought of a plan. I need to distract him. I need to make sure he doesn't notice, he thought. Returning to the table with the water, Sarah asked a casual question, trying to ease the tension. What did you think of our special of the day? It's a homemade recipe and it's a hit, she said, forcing a smile. Tom responded monosyllabically, while Emily looked anxious, her hands shaking slightly under the table. Sarah noticed that Tom's gaze was fixed on her eyes, as if he were evaluating every word and movement. Yes, I heard it's really good, Sarah said, before walking away again, feeling Tom's piercing gaze on her back. As he moved between the tables, his heart pounded. What else could you do? The idea of calling the police popped into her mind, but she needed more information. Time seemed to drag by, and every second that passed was an eternity. Sarah decided she needed to give it one more try. I'll offer a free piece of cake, he thought. Maybe then I can start a conversation with Emily. Approaching the table again, she said, Hey, I know you're busy, but we're having a cake sale today. Can I bring you a piece? It's on the house. Tom hesitated, looking at Emily, who looked almost distressed. No thanks, he replied gruffly, but Sarah could tell Emily was about to protest. Before she could say anything, Sarah smiled and insisted, Just a piece. It's chocolate and I promise it's delicious. It really is the best we have. Finally, Tom gave in, perhaps because he felt pressured by Sarah's insistence. Okay, just a little, but it's not for her. It's for me, he said, as Sarah walked away, a mix of relief and worry dominating his thoughts. As she cut the cake, Sarah wondered if she was doing the right thing. What if Tom realizes what I'm trying to do? What if he turns against me or her? His mind was in a whirlwind, but his determination to help Emily overcame his fear. She needed to act and somehow find out what was going on. With the piece of cake in hand, Sarah approached the table again. Time seemed to pass in slow motion as she prepared to make her next move. And when he looked at Emily, he saw the young woman make an almost imperceptible gesture with her hand, as if she were saying goodbye to a life she hadn't chosen. Sarah's courage solidified in that instant. She knew she couldn't let this go. Sarah took a deep breath as she approached the table where Emily and Tom were sitting. The tension in the air was palpable, and his heart was beating fast. She couldn't ignore the pleading look of the young woman, who felt trapped in the presence of the intimidating man. Tom, a middle-aged man with a stern expression and a look that seemed to cut like a knife, kept his hand on the table, as if he were controlling Emily's every move. Hi, how are you? Sarah tried to sound casual, but her voice was shaking a little. She forced a smile, but soon realized that Tom was watching her suspiciously. His eyes narrowed like a snake's. We are fine. Can you step away, please? Tom replied, his voice deep and harsh, making Sarah feel like she had been punched in the stomach. He wasn't just being protective. There was an implicit threat in his words. I just wanted to know if you would like anything else. Maybe a coffee? Sarah insisted, trying to keep the conversation flowing, while her gaze fixed on Emily, seeking support in the young woman's eyes. No, we've had enough. Tom cut in again, his expression now more hostile. He leaned forward, causing Sarah to smell the strong smell of cigarette smoke emanating from him. And you should worry about your other tables. Sarah, although scared, could not give up. Emily's gesture still echoed in her mind, and she had to do something. Just a moment, please, she said, her voice now firmer. If you change your mind, I'll be here. With one last look at Emily, who looked increasingly distressed, Sarah walked away, her heart heavy. She walked to the bathroom, a small, stuffy space with tiled walls that reflected the fluorescent light. With the door locked, she leaned against the sink and looked in the mirror. What could she do? She felt helpless, but the image of Emily, trapped under Tom's gaze, drove her. With trembling fingers, she took out her cell phone and dialed the police number. 911. What's your emergency? The attendant replied, her calm voice contrasting with Sarah's agitation. Hello, I need help, Sarah began, her voice low and hurried. I work at a diner and I saw a young girl who looked like she was in distress. She's with a man who seems dangerous. I think she is being held against her will. Can you describe the man? The attendant asked, her voice now more attentive. He is tall, has dark hair and a menacing expression. The young girl. She has light brown hair and sad eyes. I saw her making a distress signal. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself as she spoke. We're in a diner on Main Street. Please send someone quickly. Understood. A vehicle is on its way, but it may take a few minutes. Can you stay safe until then? The attendant questioned, her concern evident. Yes, I'll try, Sarah replied, even though her mind was in a whirl. After hanging up, she looked in the mirror again, adrenaline rushing through her body. What else could you do? She needed to keep an eye on Tom and Emily. Returning to the room, Sarah discreetly positioned herself at a nearby table, trying to appear disinterested as she observed their interaction. Tom seemed increasingly restless, looking around as if he sensed something was about to happen. Emily, on the other hand, was silent, as if she was waiting, or perhaps hiding a secret that left her in a constant state of alert. You shouldn't have done that, you know? Tom spoke suddenly, his voice low but filled with venom that made Sarah shudder. Emily didn't respond, but her gaze at the floor spoke volumes about her condition. Why don't you relax a little? No one here is hurting you, Tom continued, his voice louder now, attracting the attention of a few nearby customers. Let's eat and then we'll leave. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What could she do? The police hadn't arrived yet, and she couldn't just stand by and hope for a miracle. I needed to act. The young girl needed help, and she was the only one who seemed willing to do something about it. As she moved, Sarah decided it was time to try one more time. She walked over to the table, her heart beating wildly. Excuse me, but you should really consider ordering something else. We have a great chocolate cake. It's free for special customers, she said, trying to sound light, but her voice betrayed the urgency of the situation. Who do you think you are? Tom growled, his fury evident. It's none of your business. Go wait on your tables and leave us alone. I just want to help, Sarah replied, a little more boldly. You guys seem to have problems, and sometimes a piece of cake can make everything seem a little better. As she spoke, she noticed Emily look up, a glimmer of hope passing through her tired gaze. Tom leaned forward, the tension between them palpable. If you don't walk away, I'll make sure you regret it. Don't make me lose my temper, he threatened, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. I just wanted to help, she repeated, trying to maintain her composure. If you don't want the cake, that's fine. But, Emily, if you need anything, I'll be here. Okay? Sarah turned to the young woman, looking for a sign that she was listening, but Emily just looked away, caught up in an internal battle. As soon as he walked away, Sarah felt a mix of frustration and despair. It was as if the world around her had stopped, and she was in a race against time. The idea that the police were on their way brought some relief, but not enough to ease the anxiety that consumed her. She positioned herself at a nearby table where she could watch Tom and Emily without being noticed. The man seemed increasingly agitated, his gaze moving from side to side, as if he was waiting for something. Sarah didn't know if it was the police signal that was about to arrive, or if he had a plan in mind. You shouldn't have done that, Tom repeated, his voice low but filled with anger. Now you will regret it. Emily, still silent, seemed smaller and smaller under the man's threats. Sarah wanted to scream, wanted to run to the table and take Emily away, but something inside her knew that doing so would be risky. She needed to wait and watch, find the right moment to act. The beat of his heart echoed in his ears as the minutes dragged by. Every second felt like an eternity, and the tension in the air grew. Sarah felt like something needed to happen and that somehow she was at the center of it all. The hope that the police would arrive soon was the only thing that kept her firm, but the doubt about what Tom might do if he felt he was cornered made her uneasy. Tom finally stood up, looking around, and Sarah caught her breath. What was he planning? She didn't know it, but she was determined to do everything she could to protect Emily. Courage arose within her, a fire that burned with the certainty that she could not leave the young woman alone in that situation. And so, as the atmosphere became increasingly tense, Sarah decided that no matter what happened, she would do whatever was necessary to help. Sarah struggled to keep her mind occupied as she cleaned tables and served customers. However, her concern for Emily wouldn't leave her alone. The image of the young girl with sad eyes and Tom's threatening presence haunted her every moment. She knew she needed to do something. The idea of having a casual conversation with Emily appeared like a light amidst the darkness of the situation. As soon as she had the opportunity, Sarah approached the table where Emily and Tom were sitting. The smell of freshly baked cake filled the room, and Sarah decided that a piece of cake might be a good way to break the ice. "Hey guys," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "What do you think of a piece of chocolate cake on the house? It's our special of the day." Emily looked at Sarah with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, but Tom immediately cut the conversation short. "No thanks. We're fine," Tom replied, his tone gruff, as his hand clenched into a fist on the table. The tension between the three was palpable, and Sarah realized she was treading dangerous ground. Sarah hesitated, but she wasn't willing to give up on Emily so easily. She decided to try again. "You know, the cake is really delicious, and we always like to make someone's day a little sweeter." She looked at Emily, who seemed to have a slight quiver on her lips. "Do you like chocolate?" Emily started to speak, but Tom interrupted her again. "I said we're fine," he insisted, looking directly into Sarah's eyes with an expression that made it clear that there was no room for dispute. The young waitress felt a chill run down her spine, but the need to help Emily was stronger than the fear. Sarah took a step back, but didn't completely move away. She needed to think of a strategy. The bathroom was just a few steps away, and his mind began to work. As he cleaned a nearby table, he decided he needed to act quickly. With a furtive glance at Emily, who looked even more distressed, Sarah headed for the bathroom. As soon as he entered, he locked the door and took out his cell phone. With shaking hands, he dialed the police number. The sound of the ringing seemed to echo in his heart, accelerating its beat. Finally, a voice on the other end of the line responded. "Emergency, what's going on?" "Hello, I'm Sarah. I work at Diner de Cidade. I saw a young girl who appears to be in danger. She is with a man who seems to control her. Please, I need help." Sarah's voice trembled, but the urgency drove her. "Understood, Sarah. Can you describe the situation?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "The young woman is called Emily, and the man is older, looks threatening. He's holding her against her will. She made a distress signal to me. Please send someone quickly. A vehicle will be sent, but it may take a few minutes. Try to keep the situation under control and do not alert the man." "I am going to try. Thanks." Sarah hung up the phone and left the bathroom, determined to find a way to help Emily until the police arrived. Back in the salon, Sarah tried her best to act normal, as if nothing was happening. But his gaze always returned to the table where Emily and Tom were. The man was now looking around, as if he felt something wasn't right. The mood at the diner seemed to have changed, and Sarah noticed that other customers were also noticing the tension in the air. She decided the best approach for Emily would be friendship. Then, thinking about how he could get closer without arousing suspicion, he went to the table again. "Emily, would you like to try a piece of our cake?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Tom looked at Sarah with disdain. "What do you want? Don't have anything else to do?" Sarah ignored Tom, keeping her focus on Emily. The young woman looked at Sarah, her eyes expressing a mixture of gratitude and fear. The situation was becoming untenable. Tom was increasingly restless, as if he realized something was happening. "I would like to, yes," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As soon as Sarah placed the piece of cake on the table, Emily grabbed the fork and, with a quick gesture, took a piece to her mouth. His eyes sparkled for a second, reminding her of happier times. "I hope you like it," Sarah said, trying to smile. Emily's look was one of gratitude, but soon became concerned again. "You shouldn't have done that," Emily muttered, when Tom wasn't paying attention. The tone of his voice was serious, and Sarah felt butterflies in her stomach. "Everything is fine?" Sarah asked, leaning in slightly to hear better. "You can talk to me. He's not who you think he is." Emily looked around, as if afraid Tom was listening. "He's not my father. He keeps me here against my will." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She felt a wave of empathy and determination upon hearing those words. It was a confirmation of what she already feared. Tom was a kidnapper, and Emily needed help. With this in mind, Sarah decided that she would need to act even more cautiously. "I'll help you," Sarah whispered. "The police are on the way. Just stay calm." Emily nodded, but the expression on her face showed that the young woman was still terrified. Tom, on the other hand, began to look around nervously, as if sensing the rising tension. He seemed to be on alert, and Sarah realized time was running out. Several customers began to notice the tense atmosphere in the diner. A couple at the next table exchanged worried glances, while an older man frowned, noticing the exchange of whispers between Sarah and Emily. The environment, which had previously been welcoming and familiar, now pulsed with a restlessness that no one could ignore. "Come on, Emily," Tom said suddenly, standing up. "We need to go." Sarah's heart sank. She knew she needed to act quickly. With a furtive glance, she prepared to make a move. "Wait," Sarah shouted, trying to buy time. "You can't just take her like that. It's not right." Tom turned sharply, his dark eyes burning with anger. "And who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" He growled, approaching Sarah with a threatening stance. "I'm just a waitress who cares about her safety," Sarah said, trying to remain calm, even with fear pulsing through her veins. "You can't take her away." The customers began to murmur, and the heavy atmosphere intensified. Tom's gaze became more calculating, and he knew he needed to act quickly. The tension was palpable, and Sarah felt that at any moment the situation could escalate into a direct confrontation. "Emily, stay close to me," Sarah whispered, trying to create a shield between the young woman and Tom. Time seemed to drag on, and the wait for the police became increasingly distressing. The atmosphere at the city diner was filled with palpable tension. The smell of fresh coffee and fried bacon that normally filled the air now felt suffocating. Sarah, with her gaze fixed on the table where Emily and Tom sat, felt her heart quicken as the police car's sirens sounded in the distance. Hope and fear intertwined within her as she tried to maintain her composure in front of the customers who continued to consume their meals, oblivious to the drama unfolding right in front of them. The restaurant door creaked open, and two police officers entered. One of them, a tall man with a cap that seemed a little too big for his head, looked around, his gaze lingering on Emily's table. Sarah, on impulse, tried to make eye contact with them, but the tension in her chest made it difficult to breathe. She needed them to understand the gravity of the situation without alerting Tom. He, in turn, seemed increasingly restless, his hands moving nervously, as if he were waiting for something or someone. "Hi guys, how are you?" one of the officers said, trying to sound casual as they walked towards the table. Tom immediately straightened up, giving the officers a tight smile. "Hello," Tom replied, trying to sound friendly. "I'm just a father worried about my daughter. She was having a bad day, right?" His voice was soft, but there was a note of anxiety that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. The police officers exchanged glances, but Sarah sensed that there was something wrong with Tom's story. The way he spoke with nervous insistence seemed unconvincing. The other officer, a woman with short, tight hair, leaned forward slightly, assessing the situation. "And where is the young woman's mother?" she asked with a penetrating look. Tom hesitated for a moment, and the hesitation was enough to send a chill down Sarah's spine. "She's at home, worried about our girl's health," he replied, but his voice sounded more like an attempt to deflect than a plausible explanation. Emily, who until then seemed a little apathetic, made a small movement, as if she wanted to get up. Her eyes, which had been so filled with fear, now shone with silent determination. It was at that moment that Sarah realized that the young woman was about to do something that could change everything. "He's not my father," Emily's voice cut through the heavy air of the restaurant, and all eyes turned to her. The murmuring of the customers intensified, and the tension increased even more. Tom froze, his expression of confidence turning to panic. "Emily!" Tom shouted, his voice filled with anger and despair. "Sit down now. You don't know what you're saying." He leaned across the table, eyes fixed on Emily, but the young woman didn't flinch. Instead, she maintained eye contact with the officers, as if pleading for help. "Please, he's keeping me here against my will," Emily said, voice now firmer but still shaking. "I'm trapped. He's not my father, he's a kidnapper." Her words echoed in the room, and a sepulchral silence took over the room. The police reacted quickly. "So you're saying you're in danger?" The officer, now with a serious look, turned to Tom, who was squirming in his seat, his concerned father mask quickly crumbling. "That's a big lie," Tom shouted, trying to keep his voice steady, but the guilt and fear were clearly written all over his face. "She's just confused. I'm the only one who can take care of her." "Shut up, both of you." The police officer did not hesitate to intervene, her authority clear and imposing. "If you're in danger, Emily, we need you to tell us everything." Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of relief and anxiety. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but the situation was still critical. Tom, realizing he was losing control, began to stand up, a move that caused the officers to move even closer. "Don't move," ordered the officer, placing one hand on the gun on her belt. "We're here to help you, Emily. You need to stay calm and tell us everything." "I can't stay here," Emily said, looking desperately at Sarah. "He'll hurt me if I talk. He always said no one would believe me." Tears began to slide down the young woman's face, and her fragility made Sarah's heart sink. "You're not alone anymore," Sarah whispered, trying to convey strength through her gaze. "You're brave, Emily. Let's get out of this." The police officers, realizing that the situation was about to escalate, positioned themselves between Tom and Emily. "Come on, we need you to get away from her," the officer said, her voice firm. "You are being detained on suspicion of kidnapping." "This is ridiculous," Tom shouted, losing his composure. "She's my daughter. I didn't do anything wrong." But his defense was hollow, and the truth was unfolding. "You are not being arrested, but you are being detained for questioning," the male officer explained, as he prepared to handcuff him. "We need to understand what's going on here." Tom fell silent, his expression turning into a mixture of anger and despair. He realized that he had lost control of the situation and that his lies were falling apart. Every second, Sarah felt like the situation could explode at any moment, but Emily's determination inspired her to stay strong. "He's not my father," Emily repeated, now in a higher tone. "He kidnapped me months ago. I was trying to escape, but he always found me." The entire room was in a state of shock, and the murmurs began again, this time accompanied by looks of concern and compassion. The waiter nearby stopped to listen, while the customers exchanged apprehensive glances. "Let's get her to a safe place," the officer said, finally turning to Emily, who was visibly shaken. "You're safe now, and we're going to make sure you're okay." Tom, realizing that his time was running out, tried one last trick. "You can't believe her. She's just trying to frame me for something I didn't do." But his words fell on deaf ears. The truth was already clear to everyone. As the officers led Tom out, Sarah approached Emily, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "Now you're safe." Emily looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear at the same time. "And now, what will happen to me?" The uncertainty in the young woman's voice made Sarah's heart squeeze once again. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly, "but they'll take care of you. You're not alone anymore." The tension in the air was beginning to dissipate, but the feeling of relief was still fragile. Sarah knew this was just the beginning of a new struggle, Emily's struggle to free herself from the past and find a new future. And as the police car's siren echoed in the distance, Sarah committed herself to staying by her side, no matter what came next. The atmosphere at the city diner was tense, and the tension only increased when Tom, realizing that his cover had been blown, became visibly agitated. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now glowed with a mixture of anger and despair. He quickly looked towards the exit as if thinking about escape, but was interrupted by the arrival of the police, who had already approached his table. "Sir, we need to talk," said one of the officers, a tall, robust man with a determined expression on his face. Tom tried to smile, but the gesture sounded forced and nervous. Of course, there's no need for fuss. I'm just a father worried about his daughter," Tom replied, his voice shaking slightly. He gestured with his hands, as if trying to shake off the accusation that hung in the air. "You're in no position to give orders here, friend. We need you to get up and come with us," the officer said, his voice firm. Tom hesitated for a moment, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath, awaiting his reaction. "What is happening?" Emily, who until then had remained silent, finally spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "He's not my father. He kidnapped me." His words cut the air like a knife. The murmuring of the customers intensified, and their gazes turned to Tom, who now looked like a cornered beast. The police officer, realizing the gravity of the situation, took a step forward. "You are being detained for kidnapping. Put your hands up and turn around," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for objection. Tom, realizing he couldn't escape, did as he was told, but the anger in his eyes was palpable. The other officers began to handcuff Tom, and Sarah, watching everything, felt a mix of relief and concern. Relief knowing that Emily was safe, but worry for the young woman who now seemed so lost, so scared. As soon as the handcuffs were on, Tom shot a venomous look in Sarah's direction. "You're going to regret this, girl," he growled, his voice low and threatening. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't let herself be shaken. She knew she had done the right thing. Emily then got up from the table, and with an emotional impulse, ran towards Sarah. The two hugged, and Sarah wrapped her arms around her, feeling the young woman tremble. The hug was a mix of comfort and a silent acknowledgement of the horror Emily had faced. "You're safe now, Emily. It's okay," Sarah whispered, trying to convey courage to the young woman. Emily, with tears in her eyes, shook her head, as if trying to believe Sarah's words. "I can't believe this is happening. I thought I would never get out of this," Emily replied, her voice broken. Sarah tightened the hug even more, wishing she could protect the young girl from all the horrors she had experienced. The police officers, meanwhile, were preparing Tom to be taken away. One of them turned to the young woman and, in a gentle tone, said, "Are you okay, miss? Can you tell us everything that happened? We need to understand the situation to ensure your safety." Emily, still in shock, looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. The young woman took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage. I was being held against my will. He took me home and said I couldn't go back. I didn't know how to ask for help. Until I saw Sarah. I thought she could help me." The police officer wrote down the information, listening attentively to the young woman's every word, while the others prepared to take Tom away. Sarah watched the scene with a mix of gratitude and concern. Tom was being handcuffed and led out of the restaurant, but a feeling of unease still gripped her. Something didn't feel right. As soon as Tom was dragged out, the atmosphere in the city diner began to change. Customers, who had previously been fearful, now seemed more relieved, although tension was still in the air. Sarah noticed that many eyes were fixed on Emily, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. She knew that young woman's story would resonate throughout the city, but at that moment, what mattered most was making sure Emily was okay. Are you really okay?" Sarah asked, her voice soft and worried. Emily nodded slowly, but the uneasiness in her eyes didn't disappear. I just need some time. I'm so confused," Emily replied, her voice shaking. "What will happen now?" Sarah looked at the police officers who were talking among themselves, and then looked back at Emily. "They will take care of you. You can stay with me until everything is sorted out if you want," he offered, feeling it was the right thing to do. Emily smiled shyly, a smile that reflected hope, but also a fragility that made it even more real. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I would have done without you," the young woman murmured, and Sarah felt her heart sink when she heard those words. The police officers, realizing the connection between the two, approached again. One of them, a middle-aged man with a gentle look, said, "Emily, you can accompany us to the police station to give a statement. It is important that you tell everything that happened. We will make sure you are safe." "I'm going with you, Emily," Sarah said firmly, determined not to leave the young woman alone at this moment. Emily looked at her, with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "You don't need to," she started to say, but Sarah interrupted her. You are not alone in this. Together we will face this," he said, his voice full of determination. So, the two followed the police towards the restaurant's exit, and Sarah felt that, despite the horror of the situation, something good could come out of that dark moment. The lights of the city diner were shining, and hope was beginning to emerge amid the darkness that had hung over them. The air was thick, and the tension in the city diner still lingered when Sarah, now more aware than ever of the gravity of the situation, decided that she needed to know more about Tom. The image of the man who had posed as a concerned father still burned. In your memory, she glanced at Emily, who was sitting with the officers, her expression of relief mixed with a hint of fear. Sarah couldn't let this story end with just Tom's arrest. Something told her that there was much more behind that facade. As soon as the commotion in the restaurant began to calm down, Sarah approached one of the police officers who was talking to Emily. The officer, a tall man with graying hair and a watchful eye, introduced himself as Detective Miller. "Detective," Sarah began, hesitant but determined. "I don't think Tom was just a kidnapper. He seemed so much more than that." There was something about his posture, the way he spoke to Emily. The detective gently interrupted her. "I understand your concern, ma'am, Sarah, isn't it? What are you suggesting?" I saw a look on Emily's face before it all happened. She was scared of him, and it wasn't just scared of an overbearing father. It was as if she knew he was involved in something much more serious. Miller looked at Emily, who was now talking to another officer, and then looked back at Sarah. "You may be right. This type of situation is not common, and often the kidnappers are part of something bigger." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "If you have more information, we need to know. This could help save other lives." Emily, realizing that the conversation was referring to her, turned and approached. "Sarah, do you think Tom has accomplices?" His voice was shaking, but there was a fire of determination in his eyes. "That's what I'm thinking, Emily," Sarah replied sincerely. "I can't let this end here. We need to do something." The young woman took a deep breath and nodded, her expression turning into a mixture of fear and courage. "I don't know much, but I heard Tom talking on the phone a few times. He mentioned something about transactions and small towns." Emily hesitated, as if remembering a difficult moment. "He always seemed nervous, like he was afraid of being caught." Detective Miller wrote down every word, carefully watching Emily's expression. "This is very important," he said. "We need to know more about what you heard. Can you remember any names or any specific conversations?" Emily closed her eyes, concentrating. "I remember a name, Mason. He always talked about Mason. Something about deliveries and deadlines." His voice was getting stronger, and he had a notebook where he wrote everything down. "I couldn't look, but I was sure it was something dark." "Mason," repeated Miller thoughtfully. "This could be the key to dismantling this network." "Thank you, Emily. And you too, Sarah. If you have more information, don't hesitate to contact us." With that, the detective left to ask more questions to other officers, while Sarah and Emily sat at a table, trying to process everything that had happened. "Are you well?" Sarah asked, looking into Emily's eyes, which seemed more alive now, as if hope had begun to shine. "Yes, but I'm still scared," Emily replied, her voice a whisper. "This is all very new to me. I just wanted everything to go back to normal." "We will do what we can to make sure you are safe," Sarah said, decided. "We are not alone in this." We can help each other." The two girls exchanged a knowing look, and a new trust began to blossom between them. What once seemed like a nightmare was turning into a drive to fight injustice. Time passed, and weeks turned into months. The investigation progressed, and Sarah became a central figure in the fight against the criminal network that Tom had helped build. The information Emily provided was fundamental, and soon the police began to dismantle parts of this scheme, arresting several people involved. Finally, the day of judgment arrived. Sarah and Emily were in the courtroom, the atmosphere filled with anticipation and nervousness. Tom sat at the defendant's table, his countenance now haggard, a stark contrast to the confidence he displayed when he was at the diner. The judge entered, and the courtroom quieted. The prosecution began to present its case, and Sarah felt her heart quicken as she heard the details about the kidnapping and trafficking ring that Tom and his accomplices had operated. Emily was at her side, her eyes fixed on the ground, but Sarah could feel the strength emanating from her. When it was finally Sarah's turn to testify, she stood up, took a deep breath, and walked to the dais. The judge greeted her with a nod, and she turned to the room, feeling everyone's eyes on her. "I'm Sarah, and I'm here to talk about what I saw and what Emily went through," she began, her voice firm. What happened at the diner was not an isolated incident. Tom wasn't just controlling a young girl. He was part of something much bigger. Throughout her testimony, Sarah described the situation at the restaurant, Tom's behavior, and how he manipulated Emily. Every word she said seemed to strengthen the resolve of everyone in the room. When he finished, he felt a wave of relief, but also of expectation. The defense lawyer tried to discredit his testimony, but it was clear that the truth had already emerged. Tom was convicted of his crimes, and his accomplices were put on trial shortly thereafter. After the verdict, as the two young women walked out of the courtroom, a feeling of triumph enveloped them. "You did it, Sarah," Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining. "We did it." "Yes, we did." Sarah smiled, feeling happiness invade her heart. "But it's not just about us. We need to turn this into something positive." With support from the community, Sarah and Emily decided to open a cafe in honor of victims of kidnapping and violence. With the slogan "Signs of Help," the space would become a safe haven for those in need of help. The cafe soon became a meeting point in the city, where people could feel welcomed and protected. Sarah and Emily have become a symbol of courage and solidarity, showing that small actions can have a big impact. What began as a signal for help turned into a beacon of hope for many, and their story was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, courage and unity can prevail.